My name is Grace, and I'm 32. The moment I heard my sister's voice again after 12 months of silence, I should have known she was planning to destroy me. But there I was on Christmas Eve, hiding in my own hallway like some kind of spy, listening to her and my mother plot my institutionalization over hot cocoa and sugar cookies. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt betrayed by the people who were supposed to love you most. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me take you back to how this nightmare began. December 15th, 2019. That's a date burned into my memory like a brand. Robert and I were driving home from our anniversary dinner, the snow falling harder than the weather reports had predicted. 22 years together, and we were finally talking about starting that family we'd always said we wanted someday. Next Christmas, we might have a little one, Robert had said, reaching over to squeeze my hand as we navigated the winding mountain road. His wedding ring caught the dashboard light, and I remember thinking how lucky I was to have married my best friend. The semi-truck ran the red light going at least 60 miles per hour. I saw it coming, this massive wall of metal and lights bearing down on Robert's side of the car. I opened my mouth to scream his name, but the impact stole my voice, my breath, my entire world. When I woke up 3 days later, Robert was gone. The doctors explained about internal bleeding, about how quickly it happened, about how he didn't suffer. They used gentle voices and kind eyes, but their words felt like they were coming from underwater. Everything sounded muffled, distant, wrong. That's when they told me about my hearing. Traumatic brain injury, they called it. Damage to the auditory nerve. They threw around percentages and probabilities, but the bottom line was simple. I was deaf. At 32 years old, I had lost my husband and my hearing in one devastating moment. The irony wasn't lost on me. Robert used to joke that I never listened to him anyway. Now I literally couldn't hear a word anyone said. If he could see me now, he'd probably make some smart comment about finally getting my attention. God, I missed his terrible sense of humor almost as much as I missed everything else about him. The funeral was a blur of lip movements and sympathetic touches. I sat in the front pew wearing the black dress Robert had bought me for his company Christmas party just weeks before, watching people's mouths move in what I assumed were condolences. My sister Sarah kept rubbing my back in small circles, the way she used to when we were kids and I had nightmares. Learning to navigate silence was like learning to breathe underwater. Every conversation required a notepad. Every phone call became an impossible task. The doorbell might as well have been decoration. I missed my alarm clock more times than I could count, showing up late to meetings with puffy eyes and apologetic expressions. My beautiful house, the one Robert and I had spent 3 years renovating, became a prison of memories. His coffee cup still sat in the sink because I couldn't bear to wash it. His clothes hung in our closet, still smelling faintly of his cologne. I found myself talking to him constantly, since there was no one around to judge the crazy lady having conversations with the dead. Well, this is a fine mess you've left me in, I told his empty side of the bed one morning. 22 years together and you couldn't stick around for the hard part? The grief support group was a disaster. Sitting in a circle of folding chairs while people shared their pain would have been difficult enough if I could actually hear them. Instead, I spent each session trying to read lips and catching maybe every third word. The facilitator, a well-meaning woman named Patricia, would occasionally turn to face me directly and speak slowly, which somehow made everything worse. Work became impossible. As a marketing director, my job depended on meetings, phone calls, and presentations. I'd spent 15 years building my career, working my way up from assistant to department head, and suddenly I couldn't perform the most basic functions of my job. My boss, Jennifer, tried to be accommodating at first, assigning me to email-based projects and written reports. But there's only so much accommodation you can make in a world designed for people who can hear. After 6 weeks of missed calls, confused conference meetings, and projects that fell through the cracks, Jennifer called me into her office with a human resources representative. They didn't fire me exactly. They offered me a disability leave package with reduced pay and the understanding that my position would be evaluated for future compatibility. Corporate speak for, "You're done here," but were too polite to say it directly. That night, I sat in Robert's study surrounded by financial documents and insurance papers, trying to figure out how long I could maintain our lifestyle on disability payments and life insurance. The house payment alone was more than my monthly benefits. I'd need to make some serious changes. And fast. That's when Sarah called. Texted, actually, since phone calls were no longer an option. Sarah's text message was characteristically dramatic. "Emergency. Brad served divorce papers. Can Tommy and I stay with you temporarily? just until I get back on my feet. My younger sister had always been the family tornado, leaving a trail of chaos in her wake while everyone else cleaned up the mess. Her marriage to Brad had been rocky from the start. Two people who brought out the worst in each other and then blamed everyone else for their problems. Tommy, her 8-year-old son, was an innocent casualty in their war. A sweet kid who deserved better than parents who used him as a weapon against each other. I'd always had a soft spot for my nephew, maybe because I saw something of myself in his quiet way of dealing with family drama. I texted back, "Of course. How long is temporarily? Just a few weeks, maybe a month. You're an angel." 3 days later, Sarah arrived with enough luggage to suggest her definition of temporarily was more optimistic than realistic. Tommy trudged behind her carrying a backpack and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Grace!" Sarah enveloped me in a hug that smelled like stress and cheap perfume. "You look terrible. Have you been eating?" "Thanks for the pep talk, sis." "I'm fine," I said, focusing on her lips as she spoke. "Just tired." She bustled around my house like she owned it, directing Tommy to the guest room and claiming the upstairs bathroom for her products. Within an hour, my peaceful retreat had become command central for Sarah's personal crisis management. "I can help you with things," she announced, pulling out a notebook. "Phone calls, appointments, errands. Think of me as your personal assistant." It actually wasn't a terrible idea. Sarah had always been good with people, charming when she needed something. If she could handle the communication aspects of daily life that had become so challenging for me, maybe this arrangement could work for both of us. That first week, she proved surprisingly helpful. She scheduled my doctor appointments, answered the phone with professional courtesy, and even handled the insurance company when they tried to reduce my benefits. For the first time since the accident, I felt like I had an advocate. "See?" she said one evening after successfully arguing with my cell phone provider about my bill. "We make a good team. You've got the brains, I've got the mouth." Tommy was equally easy to have around. He was naturally quiet, preferring video games and books to the constant chatter that exhausted me. He seemed to understand that I couldn't hear him without looking directly at his face, and he made an effort to get my attention before speaking. "Aunt Grace?" he said one afternoon, tapping my shoulder gently. "Mom says you can't hear anything. Does it hurt?" "No, sweetie, it doesn't hurt. It's just quiet." He considered this seriously. "Sometimes I wish it was quiet at my house. Mom and Dad yelled a lot." My heart broke a little for this kid who'd learned to associate silence with peace. I ruffled his hair and decided that whatever inconvenience Sarah's presence caused, giving Tommy a stable place to stay was worth it. Living with Sarah was like having a very helpful hurricane in my house. She reorganized my kitchen, rearranged my living room furniture for better flow, and appointed herself as my official interpreter with the outside world. "You need systems," she declared, setting up a whiteboard in the kitchen for daily schedules and important reminders. "Structure is what's going to get you through this." I had to admit, having someone handle the phone calls and appointments that had become so stressful made a significant difference. Sarah scheduled my grocery deliveries, coordinated with my insurance company, and even managed to get my disability payments increased by arguing that my previous calculation had been incorrect. "You were letting them walk all over you," she said after a particularly successful phone call with Social Security. "Sometimes you need someone who isn't afraid to make noise." The trade-off was that Sarah made noise about everything. She had opinions about my clothes, my diet, my sleep schedule, and my general approach to grief recovery. She criticized my tendency to spend entire days in pajamas and instituted mandatory self-care Sundays that involved face masks and forced social activities. "Isolation isn't healthy," she'd say, while literally dragging me to the farmer's market or the library. "Robert wouldn't want you to become a hermit." I wanted to argue that Robert had actually loved our quiet Saturday mornings at home, but engaging in that conversation required more energy than I had. It was easier to go along with Sarah's improvement programs and retreat to my bedroom when I needed space. Tommy adapted to our household routine with the Resilience Kids show when they've learned to read adult moods for survival. He did his homework at the kitchen table, kept his belongings organized, and never complained about the strange new normal we'd created. One evening, I found him in the living room carefully practicing writing individual letters on a piece of paper. "What are you working on?" I asked. He held up a book about sign language. "I thought maybe I could learn this so we could talk without you having to look at my mouth all the time." The gesture was so purely sweet that I had to blink back tears. This 8-year-old was showing more consideration for my disability than most adults in my life. "That's very thoughtful, Tommy. Maybe we can learn together." We spent the next hour practicing basic signs. "Thank you. Please. I love you." It was the first time since the accident that I'd felt genuinely hopeful about adapting to my new reality. Sarah found us on the couch, hands moving through the alphabet. "What's this?" she asked. "Tommy's learning sign language to communicate with Aunt Grace," Tommy explained proudly. Sarah's expression shifted to something I couldn't quite read. "That's nice. But Grace is getting better at lip reading every day. She probably won't need sign language much longer." I wanted to point out that lip reading was exhausting and imprecise. That sign language would actually be incredibly helpful. But Sarah had already moved on to discussing dinner plans, and the moment passed. Looking back now, I realized that was the first time I noticed Sarah's discomfort with anything that made my deafness seem permanent. She preferred to treat my hearing loss as a temporary inconvenience that would eventually resolve itself, rather than a disability I needed to learn to live with. Dr. Martinez's office became as familiar as my own living room over the following months. Sarah drove me to appointments with audiologists, neurologists, and specialists whose names I couldn't pronounce. Each visit followed the same pattern: tests, scans, hopeful questions, and disappointing answers. "The damage is significant," Dr. Martinez explained during one particularly thorough examination, her lips moving in the careful, exaggerated way people used when they remembered I was deaf. "But that doesn't mean we stop exploring options." Sarah took notes during every appointment, asking questions I was too tired to think of. She researched hearing aids, cochlear implants, and experimental treatments with the dedication of someone writing a doctoral thesis. "What about this stem cell therapy I read about?" she'd ask, sliding printouts across the doctor's desk. "Or this new surgery they're doing in Germany?" Most of the options were either not suitable for my type of hearing loss or still experimental. Hearing aids were useless since the problem wasn't volume. It was that the signals weren't reaching my brain correctly. Traditional cochlear implants weren't appropriate because the specific location of my nerve damage made the surgery too risky. Each dead end felt like losing Robert all over again. I'd gotten used to the silence, but I hadn't gotten used to the isolation. Watching people have conversations I couldn't join, missing jokes, struggling to follow movies even with subtitles. The social exhaustion was overwhelming. "We'll figure this out," Sarah said after a particularly disappointing appointment. "There has to be something. You're too young to just accept this." I appreciated her determination even when it felt misguided. Sarah had always been a fixer, someone who believed every problem had a solution if you just worked hard enough to find it. In this case, her optimism was probably the only thing keeping me motivated to continue seeking treatment. The financial strain was becoming serious. Between doctor visits, tests, and treatments not covered by insurance, my savings were disappearing rapidly. Sarah helped me apply for additional assistance programs and even suggested I consider selling some of Robert's collectibles. "He'd want you to use whatever resources you have," she said gently. "His vintage guitar collection is just gathering dust." She was right, of course. Robert's guitars weren't helping anyone sitting in our closet, but selling them felt like erasing another piece of him from my life. "I'll think about it," I told her, which we both knew meant no. Sarah's frustration with my attachment to Robert's belongings was becoming more obvious. She made comments about moving forward and letting go that felt premature and insensitive. I'd been widowed for less than a year. Was I really supposed to pack up his entire existence because it was inconvenient for my recovery? "I'm not saying throw everything away," she clarified after I called her out on a particularly sharp comment. "I'm saying maybe creating some space for new experiences would be healthy." "What new experiences?" I couldn't work, couldn't socialize normally, and spent most of my energy just managing basic daily tasks. The idea that I should also be pursuing personal growth felt absurd, but I kept those thoughts to myself. Sarah was helping me navigate a world that had become significantly more complicated, and I was grateful for her support. If that meant listening to occasional lectures about my coping strategies, it seemed like a fair trade. Dr. Chen's name appeared on my referral list almost by accident. My regular audiologist mentioned her in passing, a specialist who worked with traumatic hearing loss cases and had been researching newer surgical techniques. "Probably another dead end," Sarah said as we drove to the appointment, "but worth investigating." Dr. Chen's office was different from the others, less sterile, more comfortable. She took time to explain her background, her research, and her approach to cases like mine. Unlike previous doctors who seemed to be going through diagnostic motions, she genuinely seemed interested in finding solutions. "Your case is challenging," she admitted after reviewing my extensive medical files, "but not impossible. There's a newer surgical technique that might work for your specific type of nerve damage." My heart started beating faster. After months of disappointment, I'd trained myself not to get excited about potential treatments. But something in Dr. Chen's manner suggested this wasn't another false hope. "The surgery involves bypassing the damaged auditory nerve and connecting directly to functioning neural pathways," she continued. It's complex, and the success rates are still being established. But for patients with your specific injury pattern, we've seen promising results. Sarah leaned forward in her chair. What kind of success rates? Approximately 60% of patients experience significant improvement. 20% get partial hearing restoration. The remaining 20% see no change. But the surgery doesn't make anything worse. Those weren't lottery ticket odds. Those were real, legitimate chances at getting my life back. What would the recovery process look like? I asked. 6 weeks of healing before we can assess results. Initially, sounds would be very different, more mechanical, less natural. Your brain would need time to reinterpret the new signals. But most patients adapt within 6 months. The surgery would be expensive, and my insurance company would require extensive documentation to approve coverage. Dr. Chen warned me that the approval process could take months, and there were no guarantees. But, she added with the first genuine smile I'd seen from a doctor in months, I think you're an excellent candidate. Your overall health is good, the timing of your injury makes you ideal for this procedure, and your youth works in your favor for recovery. Walking out of that appointment, I felt something I hadn't experienced since the accident. Genuine hope. Not the desperate kind that had driven me to every previous doctor visit, but real, grounded possibility. 60%, Sarah kept repeating in the car. Those are good odds, Grace. Really good odds. For once, we agreed completely. That night, I called Dr. Chen's office and scheduled the extensive pre-surgical testing she'd recommended. I didn't tell them that I'd already decided. If there was a 60% chance I could hear Robert laugh again, even if it was just in my memories, I was willing to risk everything for it. The irony would hit me later. I was about to undergo surgery to regain my hearing, but I had no idea how much I'd wish I could go back to being deaf, once I heard what my family really thought about me. But that night, lying in bed with Sarah and Tommy asleep upstairs, I felt hopeful for the first time in 12 months. I was going to fight for my life back, whatever it took. The insurance approval came through faster than anyone expected. Apparently, my case was so straightforward that even the bureaucrats couldn't find reasons to delay. Dr. Chen scheduled my surgery for December 20th, just 5 days before Christmas. Sarah was in Florida visiting her college roommate, a trip she'd planned months earlier. Are you sure you'll be okay alone for a week? She'd asked before leaving. I can cancel if you need me. Go, I'd insisted. I'll be fine. Tommy's at his dad's for winter break anyway. What I didn't tell her was that Dr. Chen had called the day before Sarah left, offering me the surgery date. Something stopped me from mentioning it. Maybe I wanted to handle this part of my recovery independently. Maybe I was tired of Sarah managing every aspect of my medical care. Or maybe I just wanted the chance to surprise my family with the greatest Christmas gift possible. My voice answering their questions instead of written notes and tired gestures. The decision felt right. If the surgery worked, I could reveal my restored hearing during Christmas dinner. If it didn't work, I'd deal with the disappointment privately and tell them about the attempt later. Imagine their faces, I told Robert's photograph the night before surgery. Sarah will probably scream loud enough to wake the neighbors. Mom will cry and say she knew I'd figure something out. It'll be perfect. What do you think will happen next? Drop your predictions in the comments below. I bet you can't guess how this story actually unfolds. The morning of December 20th, I drove myself to the hospital with a small overnight bag and Robert's wedding ring on a chain around my neck. The pre-surgery routine was standard. Paperwork, IV insertion, conversations with anesthesiologists whose lips I couldn't quite read in the harsh fluorescent lighting. Dr. Chen stopped by my room an hour before surgery. Any last questions or concerns? Just one, I said. How soon will I know if it worked? Some patients hear mechanical sounds within hours. Others take days or weeks. Your brain needs time to interpret the new signals. Don't get discouraged if results aren't immediate. But I was already imagining Christmas Eve, sitting around our dining room table, casually responding to someone's question instead of reaching for my notepad. The look of shock and joy on their faces would be worth 12 months of silence. The last thing I remembered before anesthesia was Dr. Chen's confident smile and her promise that she'd see me on the other side. Waking up from surgery felt like surfacing from deep water. My head was bandaged, my mouth was cotton, and everything hurt in a distant, manageable way. But underneath the post-operative fog, something was different. I could hear my heartbeat, not feel it. Hear it. A rhythmic whooshing sound that seemed to come from inside my skull. When the nurse adjusted my IV, the plastic tubing made a soft clicking noise against the bed rail. These weren't normal sounds exactly. They were mechanical, artificial, like listening to the world through a radio with poor reception. But they were sounds. Grace? The nurse's voice was tinny and strange, like she was speaking through a tunnel. "Can you hear me?" I tried to answer, but my throat was too dry. Instead, I nodded, and she smiled so broadly that I could see every tooth. Dr. Chen appeared in my doorway an hour later, moving carefully to stay within my line of sight. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Like I got hit by a truck," I managed to whisper. "But I can hear you. Your voice sounds like a robot, but I can hear you." "That's completely normal. Your brain is learning to process the new signals. Over the next few weeks, voices will start sounding more natural as your neural pathways adapt." The improvement was gradual but constant. By that evening, I could distinguish between different people's footsteps in the hallway. The television in my room was a chaos of overlapping noises, but I could pick out individual words if I concentrated. Nurses kept stopping by my room, partly for medical checks, but mostly because word had spread about the patient who was hearing for the first time in over a year. They spoke slowly and clearly, watching my face light up when I understood their words without needing to read their lips. "It's like watching someone be born," one of the younger nurses said. "You look like you're discovering the world all over again." She was right. Every sound was a miracle. The beeping of monitors, the swoosh of air conditioning, the distant hum of elevator machinery. Sounds that healthy people filtered out unconsciously were fascinating to me. I was discharged on December 22nd with strict instructions about rest, medication, and follow-up care. Dr. Chen had cleared me for light activities, including driving short distances, as long as I avoided heavy traffic and stayed close to home. My hearing was still mechanical and limited, but improving hourly. Voices were becoming more recognizable, and I could follow simple conversations without visual cues. The drive home was an adventure in itself. Turn signals, engine noise, radio static. I had to pull over twice just to absorb the overwhelming richness of auditory information. The world had become so much bigger than I remembered. Sarah wouldn't be home until Christmas Eve. I had 2 full days to practice listening, to adjust to this strange new version of hearing, and to plan my surprise announcement. "Soon," I told Robert's photograph that night. "Soon I'll be able to hear your laugh in my memories again." But some sounds, I was about to learn, you wish you could never hear at all. Sarah returned from Florida on December 23rd, looking tanned and relaxed, rolling her suitcase through the front door while talking on her phone in what she assumed was privacy. "No, Mother, I already told you. Grace is completely dependent on me now," she said, not bothering to look around for me. "She literally cannot function without constant help." I stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, hearing my sister's voice clearly for the first time in 12 months. This wasn't the supportive, protective Sarah who'd been advocating for my medical care. This was someone else entirely. "The house is gorgeous, obviously," she continued, setting her suitcase down heavily on my hardwood floor. "Robert had excellent taste, even if Grace doesn't appreciate it anymore. She's basically just existing here like some kind of ghost." My hearing was still imperfect, slightly robotic, but good enough to catch every brutal word. "Trust me, she's not going anywhere. She can barely handle a grocery store trip alone. I've become her full-time caretaker, and she doesn't even realize how much she depends on me." Sarah wandered into the living room, still clutching her phone, completely unaware that I could hear her character assassination. "The best part is that she's grateful for everything I do. She actually thinks I'm helping her out of sisterly love." Sarah's laugh was sharp and unfamiliar. "She has no idea how much I resent being stuck here playing nursemaid to someone who's become completely useless." I pressed my back against the kitchen wall, processing not just the words but the casual cruelty in her voice. This was how she really talked about me when she thought I couldn't hear. This was what 12 months of support had actually been. No, she's not suspicious about anything. Deaf people are surprisingly easy to manipulate when you control their access to information. She believes whatever I tell her because she has no choice. The conversation continued, but I'd stopped listening. Instead, I was replaying the last year and a half through this new lens. Every doctor's appointment Sarah had managed, every phone call she'd handled, every decision she'd influenced. How much of my isolation had been orchestrated rather than circumstantial? When Sarah finally hung up and called out, "Grace, I'm home!" I emerged from the kitchen wearing the same grateful smile I'd perfected over months of dependency. "Welcome back," I said, focusing on her lips out of habit. "How was your trip?" "Wonderful. Miami was gorgeous, and Jennifer's new condo has the most amazing view." Sarah hugged me with the same warmth she'd shown before, as if she hadn't just spent 10 minutes describing me as a burden and a fool. "I missed you, though. How did you manage without me?" "Just fine," I said, which was apparently more accurate than either of us had realized. That night, I lay awake planning my Christmas surprise with a completely different motivation. It wasn't just about revealing my restored hearing anymore. It was about discovering what else my family said when they thought I couldn't hear them. Christmas Eve morning brought my mother's arrival along with enough luggage for a week-long stay. Mom embraced me with the careful gentleness she'd perfected since the accident, speaking slowly and directly to my face. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart. You look wonderful. Sarah's been taking such good care of you." If she only knew how well Sarah had been taking care of herself. "I'm so glad you're here, Mom," I said, meaning it more than she realized. The three of us spent the morning preparing Christmas Eve dinner. Well, Mom and Sarah prepared while I performed my assigned role as the helpless deaf sister who needed constant supervision and assistance. "Grace, honey, could you set the table?" Sarah asked, speaking clearly and gesturing toward the dining room. Just the simple settings, nothing complicated. Simple settings. As if deafness had somehow affected my ability to arrange silverware. I smiled and nodded, playing my part while internally cataloging every patronizing interaction. Around 2 o'clock, I announced that I was tired and wanted to take a nap before dinner. This was partly true. My head still ached from surgery, but mostly strategic. If I was going to learn what my family really thought about me, I needed them to believe they had privacy. "Good idea," Mom said. "You rest up. Sarah and I will finish the cooking." I went upstairs to my bedroom but left the door slightly open. My hearing was still imperfect, but good enough to catch conversations from the kitchen if I positioned myself correctly. For the first hour, they discussed normal holiday logistics, cooking times, gift wrapping, family gossip. I was beginning to think my paranoia was unfounded when the conversation shifted. "How much longer do you think you'll need to stay here?" Mom asked. "Honestly, I'm getting tired of playing caretaker," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly up the stairs. "Grace has become completely dependent on me, and it's exhausting." "Has she made any progress with her independence?" "None. She's basically given up on having a real life. She just sits around feeling sorry for herself, expecting me to handle everything." Mom made sympathetic clucking sounds. "It must be so difficult for you, sacrificing your own life to take care of her." "It is, but I've been thinking about long-term solutions. Grace is never going to be self-sufficient again. She's lost without Robert, and the deafness just made everything worse." My heart started beating so hard I was afraid they might hear it downstairs. "What kind of solutions?" Mom asked. "Well, this house is worth at least $2 million, and Grace has substantial life insurance money that she's barely touched. She's basically sitting on a fortune while living like an invalid." "Sarah, what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that someone needs to make practical decisions for her future. Grace clearly can't take care of herself anymore. She needs professional care, and I need to get my own life back." The silence stretched so long I wondered if they'd stop talking. Finally, Mom spoke. "You mean like a care facility?" "Exactly. There are excellent places that specialize in people with disabilities. Grace would be much better off somewhere designed for her needs, and frankly, she's become a burden on this entire family." "But Sarah, that's a big step. Grace seems to be managing reasonably well with your help." "Managing? Mom, she's completely useless. She can't work, can't drive safely, can't even answer her own phone. She's 32 years old and living like an elderly invalid." Each word hit me like a physical blow, but I forced myself to keep listening. "And honestly," Sarah continued, "I think Robert's death broke something in her brain beyond just the hearing loss. She's not the same person anymore. She's weak, dependent, pathetic." "Sarah, that seems harsh." "It's realistic. And meanwhile, I'm stuck here playing nursemaid instead of building my own life. Tommy needs stability, I need a career, and Grace needs professional care. Selling this house and using the money for her care facility would solve everyone's problems." "What about Grace's opinion on this plan?" Sarah's laugh was cold and calculating. "Grace doesn't get to have opinions anymore, Mom. That's what happens when you become completely dependent on other people. They start making your decisions for you." I grabbed my phone and started recording. Sarah's voice came through crystal clear on my phone recording as she laid out her complete plan for my future. "I've already researched facilities. There's an excellent place about an hour north that specializes in people with traumatic injuries. Grace would have her own room, professional caregivers, structured activities." "And the house?" Mom asked. "Would be sold immediately. The real estate market is incredibly strong right now. With Grace's condition, she'll never need a house this size again anyway. But legally, don't you need Grace's permission for something like that?" "Not necessarily. I've been researching guardianship options. Given Grace's obvious inability to manage her own affairs, a court would likely grant me legal authority to make decisions in her best interest." My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. But the recording continued. "Sarah, this sounds like you've been planning this for a while." "I have. I can't spend the rest of my life being Grace's caretaker. She had her chance at happiness with Robert, and now that's over. I deserve a chance at my own life. What about the life insurance money? Would go toward her care, obviously. But there would likely be enough left over for me to get back on my feet. Think of it as compensation for the year and a half I've spent taking care of her. Mom was quiet for several minutes. When she finally spoke, her words shattered what was left of my heart. You know, Sarah, you might be right. Grace hasn't shown any real progress toward independence. Maybe professional care would be better for everyone. Exactly. And honestly, Mom, she's become embarrassing. When people ask about her, what am I supposed to say? That my 32-year-old sister sits around her dead husband's house playing victim while I handle all her basic life functions? It is sad to see her so diminished. Sad and pathetic. She used to be intelligent, capable, attractive. Now she's just broken. There's no point in pretending she's going to recover when she's clearly given up on herself. The recording was 18 minutes long by the time their conversation moved on to other topics. 18 minutes of my sister and mother discussing my institutionalization like they were planning a vacation. I spent the next hour in my bedroom, alternating between rage and disbelief. Then I did something that would have been impossible 12 months ago. I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. Martin, it's Grace. I know it's Christmas Eve, but I need an emergency consultation tomorrow morning. Yes, it's urgent. And Martin, I need you to recommend a good private investigator. Martin owed me a favor from when Robert and I had referred several clients to his firm over the years. He'd always said to call if I ever needed anything, and apparently he meant it. That evening, I played my part perfectly at Christmas dinner. I smiled gracefully when Sarah cut my meat without being asked. I nodded appreciatively when Mom spoke slowly and clearly about her holiday plans. I even allowed Sarah to translate a phone call from Robert's sister, who'd called to wish me Merry Christmas. She says she hopes you're doing well and that she's thinking of you. Sarah lied smoothly. I'd heard every word of the actual conversation, which had been much warmer and more personal. Tell her I said thank you, I replied, wondering how many other conversations Sarah had filtered or fabricated over the past year. As my family exchanged gifts and made cheerful conversation about their plans for the coming year, I sat quietly at the table where Robert and I had hosted so many dinner parties, planning my own future. A future that definitely didn't include guardian sisters or care facilities. December 26th brought the most satisfying conversation of my life, and for the first time in over a year, I was the one controlling the narrative. Martin's office was closed for the holiday week, so we met at his house where he reviewed my recording with the grim expression of someone who'd seen every variety of family betrayal. This is actionable, he said after listening to the complete 18-minute conversation. Clear evidence of intent to commit guardianship fraud and financial exploitation of a disabled person. What are my options? Several. Criminal charges, civil restraining order, immediate eviction proceedings. Your sister has been living in your house without a lease, so legally she's a guest you can remove at any time. I want her gone today. I can have eviction papers drawn up within an hour. Given the circumstances and the recorded evidence, I'd recommend a restraining order as well. 3 hours later, I returned home with legal documents and a police escort. Sarah was in the living room wrapping Tommy's late Christmas presents when I walked through the front door with Officer Henderson. Grace? Sarah looked confused. What's going on? Who is this? This is Officer Henderson. He's here to supervise while you pack your belongings. I handed her the eviction notice, enjoying the way her face changed as she read the legal language. Grace, you can't be serious. What is this about? I pulled out my phone and played a 30-second clip from Christmas Eve's recording. Sarah's voice filled the room clearly. Grace doesn't get to have opinions anymore, Mom. That's what happens when you become completely dependent on other people. They start making your decisions for you. Sarah went completely white. How did you can't hear... Surprise, I said dryly. Turns out I'm not as useless as you thought. The next hour was the most educational of Sarah's life. She tried denial, claiming the recording was somehow fabricated. Then anger, screaming about ungrateful sisters and family loyalty. Finally, bargaining, promising that she'd been joking, that she never meant any of it, that she'd been stressed and said things she didn't mean. 18 months of planning my institutionalization was just stress talking? I asked. Researching guardianship fraud was a joke? Officer Henderson remained professionally neutral while Sarah packed her belongings, but I caught him hiding a smile when she tried to argue that some of my household items were actually hers. The coffee maker was a gift, she insisted. From Robert and me to you for your birthday 3 years ago, I replied. When you were living in your own apartment and had your own life. Take it. Tommy appeared in the doorway as Sarah was loading her final suitcase. What's happening, Mom? Why are we leaving? Sarah looked at me with something that might have been desperation. Grace had surgery without telling us. She can hear now, and she's upset about some private conversations she overheard. Private conversations about selling my house and having me committed? Tommy's eyes widened. Even at 8 years old, he understood the implications. Aunt Grace, he said quietly, I'm sorry my mom said those things. This kid had nothing to apologize for. I knelt down to his eye level and signed, I love you. One of the phrases we'd learned together months earlier. You're always welcome here, Tommy. This isn't about you. After they left, I walked through my house reclaiming every space that Sarah had commandeered. I moved my belongings back to their original locations, threw away her organizational systems, and removed every trace of her 12-month occupation. That evening, I called Dr. Chen with an update on my hearing progress. The mechanical quality is almost completely gone, I reported. Voices sound natural, and I can follow complex conversations without visual cues. Excellent. You're recovering faster than most patients. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about standing up to family members who mistake kindness for weakness. Sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones planning your downfall. 6 months later, my life had returned to something resembling normal. I'd returned to work part-time, started dating again, and even joined a support group for people with hearing loss. Not because I needed it anymore, but because I wanted to help others navigate the world I'd learned to survive. Sarah never contacted me again, which was probably for the best. Mom called once to apologize and suggest that maybe there had been misunderstandings about Sarah's intentions. No misunderstanding, Mom, I told her. I have 18 minutes of recorded evidence proving exactly what her intentions were. The house felt peaceful again, filled with sounds I'd learned to appreciate. The coffee maker gurgling in the morning, rain against the windows, my own voice singing along to songs that had been silent for too long. Sometimes I catch myself talking to Robert again. But now it's different. Instead of desperate conversations with the dead,